we're starting to get the people that are required for the noon program back in the room from some pit stops. So, well, I'm going to ask our speakers and my colleagues to please come on up. That would include Vice President Ann Kaplan, Professor Emeritus Jim Banovetz, Assistant Director Dawn Peters, and Director Diana Robinson. So come on up, and you can take a seat. This looks like the dating game over here. So, no, you can stay here with me. So everybody's coming up here. I thought, yeah, you can get that one. I wanted just to take Neil Howe's, some of Neil Howe's ideas and things, and just take us on a little trip down memory lane, everybody. 1969, and we're going to learn more about the center's beginnings and all that here in a few minutes, but let's just pick up on some of what Neil covered. So a lot of you in the room, these things are going to ring very familiar. Some of you, this may be a history lesson, so take notes. So in 1969, Richard Nixon was sworn in for his first term as President of the United States. Oh, wow, okay. This is the participation part. First man on the moon, Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon. 1969, it was the Boeing 747's maiden flight. 1969, PBS was first on the air in 1969. Also, the year of the last issue of the Saturday Evening Post. The first ATM was put into service in New York in 1969. Gas was 35 cents a gallon, eggs were 62 cents a dozen, bread was 35 cents a loaf, a movie ticket, $1.40, and for everybody that works for any of us in this room, the minimum wage was $1.60. Oh, the good old days. The Dow was 873, and the population of the United States was 202 million. Okay, I'm going to share some more, a little more pop culture later, but I'll give you one more rundown, and then Dawn and I want to recognize some people that are here today. Best Picture in 1969, you can have a contest at your table. Midnight Cowboy, and it beat out Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Darn. Best Actor, John Wayne. True Grit. Best Actress, Maggie Smith. The Pride of Miss Jean Brodie. The World Series champions, okay, Cub fans, who was it? The 1969 Miracle Mets beat the Cubs to get into the World Series, or into the playoffs. The Indy 500 champion was Mario Andretti. The Super Bowl champions were the Kansas City Chiefs, and an NCAA, one of John Wooden's championship teams was UCLA. So, more pop culture and trivia later. By the way, any of those answers will get you a free drink on the weekend if you ask your friends. So, all right. So Dawn Peters and I, longtime friends and colleagues, we've been down a lot of roads together and enjoyed all of them. We've been lucky enough to be the co-chairs of this year's event, and I want to thank all our colleagues at CGS and Diana Robinson, our director, for letting Dawn and I at least put our hands on the steering wheel of this thing here and there, but it's been fun. So the first thing we want to do is, none of this happens, obviously, without a great team of people that put a lot of time and effort in for months. So we want to introduce and ask all the members of the CGS 50th Committee to stand, but your name is going to be called off. We're not going to read names all afternoon, I promise, but these people deserve a thank you. And it's in alphabetical order, so if you get the flavor here, you might know when you can go next. First, Gina Ballard. And then, you stay standing, please. Janice Foley, please. Mim Evans. Mel Henriksen. Ray Meyer. Dr. Brian Richard. Diana Robinson. Dr. Lee Schneiderman. Kathy Seabrass. Dr. Shannon Soul, Dr. Norm Walser. Those are the people that made all this happen today.
So this would not be possible, and we would not be where we are today with the entire CGS staff. So could I ask for everyone on the CGS staff to stand and be recognized? So thank you for all the work.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
Everybody, including if you're on the committee.
So put us where we are today. That being said, there are a number of former CGS staff members. Could you please be stand and be recognized as well? Because we could not be here without your help and support to get where we are today.
All right.
Thank you. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. I also serve as the executive director of the Illinois City County Management Association, as well as a couple other associations. And these sponsors come through for me all the time for good causes and good events and high quality events to be here with us today. So our gold sponsors are Commonwealth Edison, and we have Cassie Carroll here at a table over on the other side of the room. Cassie, are you in the room right now? The Horton Group, we have quite a contingency from the Horton Group, and they've already been given accolades for bringing us Neil Howe. That was awesome. So we've got Tony Evans, Mike Wojcik, and Chris Wojcik, so thank you.
Please stand.
We have Jennifer Swalsty from Irma here. She's also at a table. She's standing in the back there. Thank you, Jennifer. Those are our gold level sponsors, so please be sure and thank them for being here today. And then we have silver level Comcast. We have bronze level GovHR. I know Mike Earl is here in the room. We have Ansel Blink, Baxter Woodman, and Sadie Gold. So thank you so very much for And now we'll move into the program. When I went back to school, I was a non-traditional student, going into the MPA program at the age of 35, and with 3 boys at home. And I was so honored to have come under Jim Banovetz as the director of the program. He is someone who is a true mentor to me and a true friend. He's not only started the center, the MPA program, he has been so influential to so many people in this room. How many people in this room had Jim Banovetz as their teacher? So just look around the room. He's really, really influenced the city management profession, professionals in the state of Illinois, and I just could not be more honored to introduce him along with Greg, who I served as MPA coordinator just before Jim retired. And so I got that honor too. Not only was I a student, I also got to serve and work alongside him. So he's been just such an influential person in my life, and I would not be where I am today without his support through my career. So I'm going to let Greg say a few more words.
Thanks, Dawn. So thank you to the committee and Diane for letting Dawn and I do this together, because it means a lot to both of us to introduce Dr. Banovetz. So I could hold up, I have a copy here. If you go to online and look at Dr. Banovetz's CV, this is only the first 2 pages of it. You know, his accomplishments are well known and nationally recognized, and I still use, by the way, your case study books in class. I wanted you to know Dr. Banovetz. But I could echo a lot of things that Dawn said. Friend, mentor. My very first professor in the MPA program is Dr. Banovetz, and I know at least one other teacher in the room. I still use that assignment you gave us the very first night about write down a topic you want to write about, and then the trick was Jim says, okay, now you have to take the opposite point of view.
And he does it on Labor Day weekend.
And I do that in tribute to you, and I know Jim Norris does as well. So I want just a few more things. When I came to NIU in 1980, I arrived and I was assigned to work for Jim Banovetz. Wow, that's pretty like Dawn. I'm working for the guy that's the head of the program. You gotta be kidding me. And by the second year, I was assigned to work with Jim, but also with Carol Czar, because Carol's duties had changed because things in the Illinois City Management Association changed. So that's how I started my career. So Jim has been my boss. He's been my mentor, he's been a friend, he's been an advisor. And then when I came back to school, which I didn't have enough, Jim was the director of my doctoral studies and he was co-director of my dissertation. And as Dawn said, my career would not be anything of what it is today if it wasn't for all the time and effort that Jim Banovetz invested in me. So I wanted to say one last thing, and we're going to give the podium to Jim. I passed through the Kennedy Museum a few years ago, and I saw somewhere in the collection an inscription by someone, and I'm going to paraphrase it because it never quite left me when I was thinking about what's the last thing I want to say before I turn this over to Dr. Banovetz, is the saying went something like this: the measure of a man's life is not the riches they gain or the titles they earn, but it's the family they raised, the difference they make, and the friends they make. And when I thought of that, I can't think of any better person to apply all those qualities to than Jim Banovetz. It's all yours.
I'd be happy to. The only thing that I think they didn't say anything about was where I was 50 years ago today. I was right here. Fresh-faced out of 2.5 years in Chicago, trying to promote good government. I'm going to tell you this story because I think you're going to be fascinated and chuckle. Working as the director of the city's, the only urban studies program in the Chicago area at the time. And I spent a lot of time traveling around the suburbs of Chicago, promoting good government, promoting council manager government. And everywhere I went, there was a group of 6 matrons, all in their upper 60s, lower 70s, who followed me everywhere I went. And of course, I ultimately had to ask them why. They were a self-appointed truth squad called SOS, Save Our Suburbs. And they were convinced, absolutely convinced, that there were 2 things going on in the culture that were going to ruin it. One of them was promoting good government. Since they were in the Chicago suburbs, one can understand why that might have some mixed metaphors for them. But the other cause that they were big on was trying to stop the fluoridation of tea. Those were the 2 things that the Soviet Union was using to bring down this country. More humorous than not today, but those women were devoted. Well, 50 years ago, as I said, I was finished with my tour duty in Chicago. Back here at Northern, newly rehired as a young punk, tenured associate professor, charged with building this thing called the Center for Governmental Studies. And it's a good thing that I was a young punk, because the chore, as I look back on it, was incredibly daunting. I had to build a center that had this, that was located within in the Department of Political Science, and it had as much money as they could squeeze out for it, which meant that I had a full-time secretary, a graduate assistant, and whatever of my own time I could devote to it, given that I had a 2 courses semester teaching load and was running the MPA program. I never would have thought that 50 years ago, the Center for Governmental Studies would be anything like what it is today. And I say that with all honesty. Never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that it could accomplish what it's accomplished and be able to put on a kind of program like this with this sort of attendance. And I highly commend the staff that has made this possible. And what I want to do today is to tell you what happened in those early years that helped to push it along. There were 4 people in particular who deserve a tremendous amount of credit. People that I'm going to call after the, use a term I'm going to borrow from the novelist Karl Rohrbach, who wrote a book about the early pioneers on the northern U.S. plains called Giants in the Earth. And I want to explain to you that there have been 4 giants in the earth that really did so much to make this all come about. The first of them, of course, was Dan Witt, who was a Princeton-raised political scientist. By the way, to show you how far higher education has come, as a graduate student back in the early 50s, Dan Witt was a bachelor living in a student dorm on campus, and they took their meals in the dorm every evening and were required by rule of expulsion to appear each night at the cafeteria for their meal dressed in full academic regalia, top hat, gown, hood. That was their every evening dress. Can you imagine today's college students putting on this? Dan took on the task of building the political science department literally from scratch into a doctoral degree granting program. He had to get approval for a baccalaureate degree in political science, a master's degree in political science, a doctoral degree in political science, a master's degree in public administration, and the Center for Governmental Studies. The political science department was new. The university was new as such. There wasn't a whole lot of money. And Dan had to go himself to Springfield to deal with the higher education authorities and the state legislature to get approved for this thing called the Center for Governmental Studies. Nothing like it had appeared in any of the state college systems that were just newly designated as state universities. And as I look back on it, there were 3 very daunting problems in the job that I took. Frankly, I was too naive to realize it at the time. 3 daunting problems. The first one, of course, is budget. The budget that I had starting out was a full-time secretary, a graduate assistant, and as I said, whatever time I could eke out after teaching 2 courses and running the MBA program. Dan Witt's performance all the more remarkable when you realize that in the College of Liberal Arts at that time, there were 18 departments, all wanting an equal level of support. Dan was the only department chair able to get a research center called the Center for Governmental Studies. And that was a remarkable achievement. The second problem that I had to face in coming on is that there was an outfit down in central Illinois that was dedicated full force to the proposition that Illinois would not have a Michigan State, a second major university. And they were damn certain they were going to make certain it didn't have it. Bad enough that they had some in Illinois University, which wasn't anywhere near as developed as they would like to be. But they certainly weren't going to allow something like that in the Chicago area. And I could go on and tell you some stories from that era. But let me say that anything we accomplished in those early years at Northern Illinois University was accomplished by blood, sweat, tears, and ultimately the firing of 2 of the best leaders this university ever had. All engineered behind the scenes down in Springfield by U of I related people. So we had a challenge set out for us in those early days. The third problem, of course, is that there wasn't much hope in getting additional resources. The university was new, and the bigger problem was that it was generally little recognized, even in Northern Illinois, for what it was. My job, obviously I wasn't going to get more money in the budget. My job was to go out and get grants so we could afford to do some research. But how does an unknown organization in a little-known university go out and search for grants? Thanks be to God, there were some wise people in that day. And shortly after I took over the job, I got a phone call from a guy named Sam Gold at the University of Illinois. Sam was not a professor in the traditional sense. He didn't have a PhD, he had a law degree. And he ran an organization called the Institute of Government and Public Affairs at the University of Illinois. And he was a behind-the-scenes key player in the movement then going forward in Illinois to rewrite the Illinois Constitution. It was 100 years old, it was archaic, it was out of date, it was inadequate. Sam had drafted, he never admitted this, but it's true, he had drafted a new constitution, but he needed a constitutional convention. And Sam was the person in academia who was more respected and supported than any other academician I've ever seen be respected and supported by a state-level government. They managed to get a referendum passed to call a constitutional convention. They had just managed to elect the delegates to that constitutional convention when Sam gave me a call and said, "Jim, I need your help. We've got this constitutional convention coming up. I can handle all the state-level details, but I'm not that up-to-date on local government. Can you join the team and help me with the convention and the sale of its product? I can't offer you any money, but you'd be doing the state a heck of a service." Well, I accepted it, not just to do the state a heck of a service. I accepted it because I needed to get publicity about Northern Illinois University and the center and get it known out there. And I knew that the job was going to entail a lot of travel around the state, explaining council manager government, but even more explaining this thing called home rule that was put into the local government article. Now, Chicago wasn't any more popular then than it is today. And can you imagine the statewide convention giving home rule to those SOBs in Chicago? Well, Chicago had enough clout to get it, but it had to be sold to the rest of the state. And we needed a reputation for NIU and the Center for Governmental Studies. And so as I went out about the state, and I did this literally for 40 years, going around the state talking about the local government article, home rule, and better forms of managing government. But we managed to create the environment in which Northern Illinois University could hope to adjust for funds. Well, I've told you about one of the giants in the earth, Dan Webb. Let me tell you about the second one, because that's where this comes in. The problem, we finally, because of the work around the state that we were doing, we finally managed to begin to get in the mid to late 70s our first contracts to get outside funding. Began the flow of funding so vital to an organization like this. And that was achieved by a political science colleague named Bob Agranoff, who was director of the center at that time while I was chairing the political science department in which the center was located. He began to not only bring in cash flow from projects, contracts, but he expanded the range from just government operations oriented to go into the human services field. And we began to develop contracts with agencies in the human services field, and particularly the mental health field. And of course, the creme de la creme was getting the contract that was negotiated, they referred to earlier, with the International City Management Association to provide a secretariat in a university-based organization to provide support services for this new breed that was appearing all over the country, a person called a city manager. And we succeeded, we got the grant, we worked out the arrangements with ICMA, and lo and behold, the operation is working well enough that it is now being widely copied in other states in the United States. So, plaudits to the Center for Governmental Studies. So the second one was Bob Agronoff, who was the key player in pulling that off, the second giant in the earth. The third is a name that I know you will all recognize. President of the university, and then moved on to become the board chairman of the three-university system, the chancellor of a three-university system with NIU, Illinois State, and Sangamon State. Bill, my fading memory. Bill Monat was president of the university at the time that they began to recognize that the organization couldn't stay within the Department of Political Science. The college could have only one of them, and it had to move over there. And so, working with then the outstanding Dean Paul Burgess, the two of them put together a format for separating the MBA program and the Center for Governmental Studies. And they did this behind closed doors and without telling a soul. Even me, as close as Bill and I were in those days, always right up to his death. I found out about it when I got called to the dean's office one day and was given a choice. We're going to break these two organizations apart. One's going to be the Center for Governmental Studies, one's going to be the Master of Public Administration program. Which one do you want to direct? And I chose the Public Administration program solely because I love to teach. You've already figured that out. I love to stand up here and so I chose that, and the Center for Governmental Studies went off in another direction. But Bill Monat, for bringing about that separation and putting the center in a place where it didn't have to be concerned with intra-college competition for funds, the university was then in a position to begin to provide it with a reasonable body of support going forward. So Bill Monat is the third of the giants in the earth. The fourth is also a name that will be familiar to everybody in this room. When they separated the two organizations, they provided the MBA program with a full-time position for coordinating the city management intern program. And I hired a young MBA graduate for that assignment. She did an absolutely outstanding job of developing that position into a remarkable operation that would play a key role in the MBA program becoming what it is today. Everything was going along fine when she came into my office one day and said, Jim, I want to, the Center for Governmental Studies has lost the person running the secretariat, and I've been offered that job and I want to take it. And my first reaction was, no. And then I stopped to realize she really needed it. We needed to go there. The center's new director was a brand new, newly minted associate professor of political science who was not a specialist in local government. He was a specialist in social science research methodology, Doug Dobson. And he had hired as his assistant director a person who had been active in the field with government in northern Illinois, but had no contact working within this monstrosity called a university. And these were sent out to deal with the university bureaucracy. The person who was my intern coordinator was a person who was resident on campus, knew everybody, was on a first-name basis literally with all of the senior administrators at the university, had a list of contacts and a body of knowledge far superior to what her job title would be on. And she's the one who helped to guide these neophyte, new directors into building this organization the way it is. And you all know her because she's only recently retired, and I hope she's here. I've not been able to find her. But you know her. Is Carol Czar here?
Yeah,
Right there.
Stand up, Carol. Carol, you're not so old you can't stand up. So she is the fourth giant in the earth that made possible that which I did not think would be possible when I took on this job in 1969. So that's how the center was born, how it struggled through its early years, and finally was in a position to accomplish what's been accomplished today. And I wish it Godspeed and best of luck as it goes forward. Thank you.
right. So I can't think of two people who are better, who could have done a better job of recounting CGS history than Jim, for one, and Anne, who you will hear from in just a moment. They were both active participants in shaping the history of CGS, and we won't say for exactly how many years that's been, but it's been a significant span of time. So it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Anne Kaplan, who's the Vice President for Outreach Engagement and Regional Development at NIU, and that's the division in which CGS resides. She's an historian by training, so we prevailed upon her to come and share her insights and reflections on how CGS got to this point. And she's been part of NIU's administrative team for 45 years and has served in managerial roles in almost every central university function. So there's really not much you can ask her that she wouldn't know the answer to. And she's been just a phenomenal resource to us, and a cheerleader and an inspired Sherpa to how we move forward. Her division, our division, is responsible for 4 outreach centers, and those include conferencing and event management, the university's growing esports programs of all things, which is increasingly important to a lot of universities trying to boost student enrollment and use esports as a way to improve teaching and learning. A wide range of P20, economic development, public management, nonprofit, and STEM initiatives, and the university's public radio station. So she has quite an interesting collection of units that she runs magnificently. The common thread throughout these 16 units that fall under her is that they are all externally focused. We collaborate with faculty and staff on existing projects while building partnerships externally to the university that link research and support services to the community and the larger region. Under Dr. Kaplan's watch, NIU received Carnegie designations, which are a pretty big deal, for both outreach and partnerships and curricular engagement. And NIU was also designated as an Innovation and Economic Prosperity institution by the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. That's why we speak in acronyms so much, because these titles are always very long. Dr. Kaplan holds a BA in history from Carleton College and a PhD in history from Washington University in St. Louis. NIU and I personally have been fortunate to have her guide us through these very interesting times, especially for public university. Please welcome Dr. Anne Kaplan.
Thank you. Well, I haven't been here quite as long as CGS, but almost. And most of the developments that Jim described, were going on well away from anything I was working on until sometime in the mid-'80s, when, in the wake of President Monad's departure for the chancellorship in Springfield, I followed John Latourette from the west end of Loudon Hall to the east end, where he became NIU's 10th president. President Monad had taken his right-hand man with him to Springfield, and I took on a somewhat similar role, similar, not identical, role for John Latourette. I'd been in the office not very long, like a couple of weeks, before I got a visit from Doug Dobson, who was the CGS director from 1981 till I think 1989. So Doug comes in, I didn't know Doug, but Doug comes in, introduces himself. We have a brief conversation about the weather and the statue outside the office and so on. And then he asked if I needed anything. Well, I didn't think so. But to be honest, I had no idea. So a few weeks back, Doug calls to ask me out for lunch. So we went to the junction. We had another start-stop conversation and parted company. Again, with me wondering if that was standard activity for presidential staff assistants. So a couple of days later, I ran into John Lewis, who was then working in corporate relations, which was downstairs from the president's office. And I told him I'd had these two rather odd and inconclusive encounters with Doug Dobson and couldn't figure out what anything he wanted. So John suggested that I call HR, Human Resources here, to see how Doug was being paid. So I did that, only to discover that part of the salary was on one of the president's accounts. So who knew? Certainly not me, not President Latourette either. But President Monad, ahead of his time, I think, had been using CGS for institutional data gathering, mapping, statistical analysis, and other university purposes. That was a precedent that John Latourette was happy to follow. During his presidency, the Center's involvement in university strategic planning, survey research on legislative issues, provision of technical assistance to both internal and external units expanded considerably. John Lewis himself joined the Center in 1991 to take over economic development activities. Roger Dahlstrom brought government planning experience to community projects. Rima Roy brought expanded data services and mapping expertise. And workforce development, performance management, and evaluation rounded out what was becoming a significantly enhanced set of services. So center expertise during that period helped locate and justify the university's regional centers along the I-90 and the I-88 corridors, as well as in the city of Rockford. The center staff played a similar role in describing options for the location of the university center of Lake County. They helped assess the demand for engineers in the northern Illinois region, thereby playing a role in the university's successful pursuit of the College of Engineering. So by the end of the Latourette presidency, CGS was a widely recognized entity, both on campus and off. It had maintained its long-standing relationship with the Illinois City Management Association. It was gaining increasing public visibility, both for itself and for the university through its annual publication of the Illinois Policy Survey, its ability to provide data on the home legislative districts of NIU students, the standard operating information for the university's government relations staff, its maps of NIU alumni residency concentrations, help provide university talking points about the degree to which NIU claimed the northern Illinois region. And it was providing state governmental agencies with information they requested for their own planning. Not every client took CGS's advice, but CGS's reputation for accurate data, useful information, and unbiased evaluation was, I think, by the end of the century, well established and a fundamental component of its budget model and its expanding network of statewide relationships. CGS's work in the 1980s and 90s perfectly represented the kind of activity President Latourette believed could distinguish regional universities fortunate enough to be located in regions like Northern Illinois. In a 1988 presentation to the doctoral granting institutions of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, John offered his view on new methods of relating the university to its region. He drew on the history of the land-grant colleges established by the Morrill Act in 1861 and argued that the role those institutions played in the agricultural revolution of the late 19th century would be replicated by an equally appropriate response to the economic development needs of the late 20th century and thereafter. The modern land grant, as John called it, operating in close proximity to businesses, laboratories, distribution centers, manufacturing plants, cultural facilities, and service industries, is likely to find an extended campus in its own backyard. Its faculty and its students are as likely to be found in the off-campus workplace as in the main campus classrooms. Its faculty, the president said, are likely to be developing joint ventures with industry, assisting small businesses, providing technical advice on research, or performing in local theaters and concert halls. In other words, the modern land-grant university would be an integral part of the community around it. We would have a direct impact on the economy, the standard of living, the quality of life of the region in which it is located. It would be a full partner with neighboring businesses, industries, governmental units, and cultural facilities in developing and maintaining the society of which it is a part. So the president went on in that speech to describe the role NIU is playing in educating the population of the Northern Illinois region. But he said, the most significant interaction of the university with the region occurs at the program level. It is the cumulative effect of these developing programmatic relationships which defines the modern land-grant university. There were examples of relevant NIU programs in many disciplines, but in the social sciences, Banovetz said, the primary unit is our Center for Governmental Studies. Now, many of you would recognize the projects the president described. I won't tell you all of them, but I'm sure you would agree with his comment that the center's work was complemented by one of the nation's leading master's programs in public administration, a program which has prepared many of the local and county government officials in Illinois. We have educated the city and county managers, John said, and we continue to support them with a full range of technical services once they are in the field. In his closing paragraph, Banovetz argued that the best educational systems for the future would be systems that encourage the development of the modern land-grant university he was describing. The modern land-grant university, he predicted, would carry the land-grant philosophy beyond the agricultural and industrial societies of the past into the society of the 21st century. So I think there was something in the educational wind about that time, because within the next 20 years, relevant national associations and foundations were all talking about the public purposes of public higher education. Kellogg Foundation, in a series of publications entitled Returning to Our Roots, called for a renewed partnership between the public and public educational institutions. ASCU, which is the organization President Banovetz was speaking to in 1988, eventually published Stewards of Place, arguing that the engagement of universities with their regions must be place-related, interactive, and mutually beneficial. And in 2006, the Carnegie Foundation, as Diana said, began recognizing community engagement through an elective classification that reaffirmed an institution's commitment to deepening the practice of service and to strengthening the bonds between campus and community. Carnegie defined community engagement as a collaboration between institutions of higher education and their larger community. It could be local, could be regional, could be global, for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in a context of partnership and reciprocity. NIU received the Outreach and Partnerships designation in 2008, following an application which, in the words of the foundation, provided compelling evidence of the application and provision of institutional resources for community use with benefits to both campus and community. It would hardly have been possible to achieve that designation without multiple references to projects undertaken by the Center for Governmental Studies. And we will continue to rely on the good work of CGS to maintain the recognition we've received to date. It's not a one-and-done process. Carnegie Foundation has mounted an ongoing challenge to universities to promote best practices, pursue continuous improvement, collect data, and document the effectiveness and impact of the kind of teaching, learning, and research that reflects the genuine institutionalization of community engagement. Staff in the Division of Outreach and Engagement are working with partners throughout the university to recognize and support existing engagement practices and to encourage wider participation in initiatives which address critical societal issues and strengthen civic responsibility. I think NIU has come a long way on that path over the past 50 years, and CGS has been and will continue to be one of the university's major engagement drivers. CGS projects today cover a much wider range of issues than was the case when the center was founded. You could get a sense of the range of CGS team and the CGS team initiatives described in your conference materials, and you can keep up with current and recent work on the center's website. All of those projects respond to real regional needs, and all of them depend on genuine and often extensive collaboration with regional centers, municipal colleagues, association members, and state agency staff. All of them reflect the research and service orientation which underpin the CGS concept from the beginning. So I think we are indebted to the founders and CGS directors who established and then expanded that vision, to the university administrators who have nurtured and supported it for the past half-century, and of course to the staff, past and current, who fulfill the university's engagement mission on a daily basis. We thank you all for that.
Thank you. We wanted to share our history with you because the CGS of today is very different from the one 50 years ago. And I'm proud that we've been able to evolve with the changing needs of the region and with the changing role that universities are playing in today's society. So I can't think of two better folks than Dr. Banovetz and Dr. Kaplan to share their reflections and their insights. Just a few very quick housekeeping notes. Those of you who would like CEUs for today's conference, just go to the sign-in area at the registration desk and we can help you take care of that. Also, if you haven't yet filled out your cards that you left at your place for the morning session, you can do it at any point today. Just leave it on the table, either here or in the breakout rooms, and we will collect them. If you could do it, though, before the afternoon break, that would be excellent, so we have time to actually take a look at them and make feedback the themes at the end of the day. And finally, there are 5 copies of Neil's book left. They went fast. If you'd like one, you can see Mel Robles on the other side of the partition. She can help you there. And my understanding is that Rebecca Ryan's books, any unsold books, will go into our bookstore. So you'll have ample opportunity to get those as well. So we're a little bit behind. Please take 5 minutes to break, and then you can move to the next set of concurrent sessions. The Financing the Future is in the Sandberg Auditorium to your left, and the Environmental Workshop, the Regency Room to your right. Thank you.